Okay, moving on to our next work session. We have the City of Vancouver here to talk about annexation. This is an opening discussion. We've been anticipating this, so please come forward. So welcome. Please go ahead and get started.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. So, is it on? All right. First, I wanted to say thank you for the time this morning to come and talk about this topic with the County Council. And I wanted to start off with really why we're here today. And so I think as the County Council is aware, back in March, our City Council heard a presentation from our Chief Financial Officer around annexation scenarios. But that actually dates back, that conversation, to earlier than that, when we were actually scoping our comprehensive plan. As I know you're aware, because they're kind of parallel efforts, you are updating your comprehensive plan. We're updating our comprehensive plan at the same time. And part of that really demands that we consider, what does Vancouver look like over the next 20 to 40 years? And part of that is the idea about what happens if the city's boundaries change. Because the urban growth area around the city, where we've seen a lot of development, is referred to as the Vancouver urban growth area for a reason. It's tied to the city. We provide a lot of utility services and other services to that area, but annexation is a very complex topic. There are a lot of facets where it affects both organizations. It certainly has an impact on the people that live out there. And so we wanted to be able to come and talk with the County Council and assess your interest in really starting to have those conversations, what public engagement might look like for having those conversations with the folks that are living out there, and really ultimately, ideally, culminating in some kind of a years-long plan that would result in the urban growth area becoming part of a city, and then being able to move forward from there. I would anticipate, if you're amenable at the end of the conversation today to allowing your staff to start engaging in those conversations with us, it's probably a year and a half long process before you'd really see anything come from that, just because of all the different pieces of each organization that it affects. And so we're going to start off. As we were talking about this internally, I realized that we've had enough turnover in our staff that there's not a lot of folks who have actually been through any larger annexations with the City of Vancouver, but Rebecca Kennedy is one of those. And so we'll start off really with just kind of how the Growth Management Act is intended to work.
Great. Okay. Thank you again for having us. Rebecca Kennedy, I'm the Deputy Community Development Director for the city. And as the city manager mentioned, I was involved in the last kind of significant annexation that was Van Mall North in 2017. Do want to point out that Dave Perlick, our parks director, is here, and he was around for Cascade Park. So we do have some internal expertise, but as the city manager noted, we've had quite a bit of turnover over the last few years. So next slide, please. So just a kind of quick overview to ground us in annexation and the Growth Management Act. I believe you're all aware that, as the city manager noted, we are doing our comp plan updates, and we are required to have an annexation chapter in that outlines policies for annexation, how we'll pursue it, what the kind of city strategy is, and ideally, it addresses your full urban growth area because you're planning for a 20-year period, and the Growth Management Act anticipates that cities will annex their urban growth areas in those periods. Obviously, that has not been the pattern that has existed in Clark County. And I'll also note that the city of the VUGA is, if not the largest, one of the two largest urban growth areas in the state. I believe there's a population of about 175,000 people in the VUGA. So very significant size that's not typical of the rest of the state. The kind of GMA facilitates the provision of urban services to areas that have or are intended to develop at urban densities. So that's the point of setting UGAs, is that these are areas that we anticipate at some point will incorporate, either through annexation or some other strategy, to be urban areas, developed at urban densities, and served by urban levels of service. There are many methods of annexation. that the state enables. I won't go into all of them, but the direct petition method is essentially property owners agreeing when they're petitioned to be annexed, can certainly hold a vote on it. And there are strategies that there are processes enabled that are really based on interlocal agreements between jurisdictions to facilitate, again, those incorporation of urban growth areas. And then just want to note that the legislature has provided some financial tools to support annexation of UGAs, but they are in the context of Washington's sort of structural revenue challenges, insufficient to maintain urban service levels for current residents as well as those coming into any jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So some pretty important process considerations as sort of a baseline understanding for starting any annexation conversations. As the city manager noted, annexations of any size are complex and they require careful and intentional planning on collaboration, and it is a multi-year process. Even for, Van Mall North was not huge, it wasn't insignificant, but that was a multi-year process because the transition of services, the services people rely on a daily basis, is a complex undertaking. And you have to continue providing essential services without interruption, right? So that is a thing that requires a lot of planning. You have to have interlocal agreements in place to basically for all service areas. So, and those have to be negotiated in advance, and they all sort of take their own discussion and process because, the provision of garbage and recycling collection is much different than the provision of parks and open space, for instance. So those service areas all really need their own discussion and process. Again, and the city manager mentioned this, our CFO gave a presentation in March to our city council on just the financial fiscal impacts of potential annexation scenarios. And what that tells us is that we need new tools in order to provide those urban services to an area the size of the UGA and to really facilitate balanced annexation. So when I say balanced, I mean annexations that take in cohesive areas and have both residential and commercial uses. And then most annexation methods require some level of community engagement. In my experience, whether that is required or not, you need to do it. You have to really involve the community and help them understand it's a big transition for community members who, unlike some of us, are not engaged in the day-to-day realities of water provision or fire service provision, for instance. Next slide, please. So in terms of why UGAs develop at urban densities, I think it's important to kind of set a baseline understanding for that. We have, as I mentioned, a very large urban growth area, and it is largely developed at urban densities. So why is that? One of the reasons is because cities provide or extend urban services. So the city manager will talk in just a few minutes about how the city currently provides urban services to areas of the UGA and what those services are. But one of the primary reasons that development in the UGA has occurred the way it is because the city has agreed to extend water and sewer and fire. I was actually, as an aside, on a tour a couple weeks ago with the Building Industry Association, looking at some of their problems and challenges and different projects in the UGA and smaller cities. And all the projects that they were talking about in the UGAs, they were talking about how they had to work with multiple jurisdictions because the utility provision was coming from the city. Also, the GMA, while it doesn't have sort of a legal requirement, it has a very clear expectation for incorporation of urban areas. Often that's through annexation. It could be through some other method, but the idea is that areas that develop urban densities need to be served by jurisdictions that are set up to provide urban services. And then I think it's really important when you talk to folks, and I've been receiving emails about this since our CFO gave this presentation, is that the reason that we have urban growth areas and we develop at urban densities inside those is because the intent of the GMA is to facilitate efficient provision or develop efficient use of land so that we can preserve farms, forests, and resource lands outside of the urban growth areas in the cities. So I've heard from a lot of people, we really want to preserve our farmland. That's exactly what the urban growth area, the GMA, and annexation as a tool is intended to do. And then generally, the state-enabled revenue tools and the GMA structure intend for cities to provide urban services and counties to provide social and human services. So Clark County is pretty unique in the state in the fact that we have such large urban growth areas where the county is providing urban services or trying to provide urban services, and where the city has extended our services so far to so many people. That's not a typical characteristic of other places in the state outside of pretty much Spokane area. Next slide, please.
All right. So what I want to do is show you 3 of the 4 maps that the city council had a chance to look at when we were having our annexation discussion, because the boundaries of the 3 really don't match. The one that I didn't include is the Orchards and SR 500 out to Padden Parkway, the small one of the 3 that would have impacted about 3,000 people. Because one of the things that I think we have to be very careful with in discussions about annexation is that, as Rebecca said, the tools that the county has are different than the ones that the city has as far as revenues to provide services. But there's also pitfalls that you can fall into that can actually make the situation worse. Say if the city annexed an area that provided a lot of sales taxes and that distribution shifted to us away from the county, and that wasn't balanced with the cost of services being provided, that could actually put the county into a financial hole that's worse than the one that you see year over year. So there's just a lot of considerations around things like that. So if you'd advance, thank you. One more. So the 3 maps that you'll see are our water district and the sewer district and then fire district 5. Fire district 5 is a bit unique in that we work very cooperatively with that group. And while they are separately governed and they have their own financial staff, the firefighters are part of our bargaining unit and our City of Vancouver employees. And that agreement was initially set up in anticipation that over a period of years that we would slowly bring Fire District 5 into the city. It was intended to actually facilitate that annexation and that transfer over time. And so the other thing that's worth mentioning related to this is that as development occurs, when the developers subdivide the property and purchase the property, there is actually an agreement that is set up with that property that they are consenting to a future annexation, and that rides with the property. I'm sure that's probably going to be a surprise to some of the folks sitting out there if they haven't looked at their title opinion, but with the city being the provider of urban services, that's part of the agreement that if we're going to extend it, we want to make sure that there is a mechanism for it to be part of the city someday. So these are the boundaries of Fire District 5, and while they certainly extend north of the community, I did just want to point out that there is a pocket over there on the kind of southeast side of the map that's included in that area. We work pretty seamlessly with this group. We staff the fire stations. We do the design and manage the construction of Fire Station 11 as a project through the city with funding from the district combined with funding from us. So we work very cooperatively with them. Advance one more, please. And this is the water utility service area. You can see that it does not extend as far north or necessarily as far east. But then this one, we also pick up some areas kind of on the northwestern portion of the community. Water and sewer, as far as the engineering feasibility of extending them, do look a bit different just because of the water is easier to extend when you're dealing with elevation changes than sanitary sewer is. I would also point out that, kind of that northwest area, Hazel Dell, Philida, that's served by the Clark Regional Wastewater District. We also do work very cooperatively with Clark Regional Wastewater. They have the same contract provider for their facilities that we use for operating our facilities. There's commonality in equipment. There's commonality in the control systems. Again, in anticipation that at some point, someday, that area could be part of the City of Vancouver. You could advance one more. And this is the smallest of,
Just ask a
Sure,
quick
Sue.
question there. So are you thinking that the city of Vancouver at some point in the future would take on that responsibility of that wastewater district?
it's actually the way that they're structured is a planned, it's not really a planned obsolescence model, but it's a planned transfer model. There's a trigger in the agreement that at such time as I think it is, we would annex 80% of the property value in their system, they actually become part of the city of Vancouver.
And you'd take over those
Right.
services?
Mhm.
Thank you.
And the sewer utility service area, this is the smallest of the three as far as the boundaries go. Again, just the challenges and then other service providers being out in those areas where boundaries start to meet up. Easier for us to extend water, and that's always a conversation between us and other water providers about, if we are going to extend, which one of us has the easiest path and the most cost-effective path to get there.
Next slide, please. So just going to go over some kind of key considerations as we think about the potential for city-county collaboration in developing potential annexation strategies. The first just thing to kind of outline, I touched on this earlier, but it is very, very complex to transition services and to do transition areas from one jurisdiction to another. And so at scale, you need to, you have to facilitate the transfer of services. So that looks different depending on what the service is. In the case of, water and sewer, we just touched on what that can look like in terms of absorbing existing utility providers. But you have to do that across the board for services. So it's everything from, water, sewer, parks, solid waste collection, permitting development, applying land use standards, facilitating that process, public safety. I mean, every single service jurisdictions provide. You have to think about the transfer of facilities. So things that are currently owned and managed by the county transfer over to the city during an annexation process. For instance, Schaefer Park was in the city. When we annexed Van Mall North, Schaefer Park became a city park. And we are now, redeveloping and investing in that park using city funds. We didn't get any of the park impact fees that development put into the county to do that, right? So that's the next thing, is the transfer of revenue. So right now, the way we all sort of fund things, and again, in Washington, doesn't work perfectly because we do have structural revenue challenges, but as development happens, we collect impact fees, system development charges that are essentially designed to help offset the impact of that development on essential services. So systems development charges fund the relative or proportional impact of a new development on the water or sewer system. Transportation is the same thing. Parks is the same thing. And there are rules at the state level about how you can use those impact fees. They have to be directed to the specific geographic areas where that impact occurred. And so the transfer of those revenues will be essential in terms of thinking about how we move towards an interlocal if we do decide to pursue that. In Van Mall North, it was a different context, and I think we just decided to move forward. But it is an example. Schaefer Park is an example of how an annexation can be very challenging for cities, because you can take on things that you did not actually collect the revenues to invest in to provide the services. And so that will be a key piece of this conversation. Special districts is the same thing. We have special districts like the Metropolitan Park District in the county that don't exist in the city. Those are designed to fund specific projects in specific areas. The transfer of those things would also be part of a negotiation or a collaborative approach to figuring out how to do this. In larger annexations, you transfer staff. We still have staff that came over to the city in the Cascade Park annexation from the county. And so how you do that obviously is a big a process, and like similar to, the community, there's people involved. So you have to be very thoughtful about the staff transition. And then I know this is boring, but I cannot emphasize enough because I dealt with this before. The transition of records is incredibly complicated. How you store them, how you manage them. I was literally there when records were transferred over from the county to the city in the Van Mall North process. And there were boxes and boxes of things being unloaded. I know we're more digital now, but that is a huge thing that you have to manage very carefully because there's so much state regulation of maintenance and provision of records under our sunshine laws. Next slide, please. So potential short-term areas of collaboration, and this is obviously our sort of initial brainstorm, and it is not exclusive or in any way intended to, be everything we could collaborate on in the short term, but it is just some ideas from the city side. So short term, we would like to understand interest in jointly exploring potential annexation scenarios. I think we all realize that the reality of our funding situations is that it is expensive to provide services to people. We have some structural revenue challenges, and the city and the county providing duplicative services long-term may not be the best way for us to proceed from a fiscal sustainability standpoint. We would like to jointly advocate at the state level for better financial tools, again, to facilitate balanced annexation. So where you're taking in areas that essentially generate less revenue than they take to serve, and areas that generate more revenue than they take to serve, which is traditionally this residential commercial split. And would like to work together really to talk to our delegation at the state level and advocate in Olympia. And then just developing a framework for working together on how we might get to a broader agreement. I think it's sort of like you have to talk about how you'll do the thing before you can do the thing. So how we kind of structure coordination efforts. How do we work together to vet, analyze, develop a preferred annexation scenario? How do we work together to identify transition needs and requirements for all major service areas without any disruption of essential services? And then how do we communicate information out to county residents and city residents? There will be my experiences there are lots of questions and concerns, and it's really important to provide consistent, transparent, ongoing, repetitive information to folks to help them kind of get the full picture. Because again, it's not intuitive or something most people think about. Next slide, please. And then in terms of longer term areas for collaboration, and again, not intended to be exclusive, we would like to talk about the county adopting city development standards prior to annexation. That really ensures that new development meets urban standards while we're working towards an interlocal agreement. And it allows incremental development of more integrated land uses that sort of more align with the city's vision about how to build connected and accessible neighborhoods, how to address some of our biggest challenges around transportation, around climate, around housing, for example. And then obviously thinking about, or maybe not obviously, but thinking about the delegation of certain services to the city as we sort of phase a transition over time. So again, that could look like development review and permitting, also public safety. And I know our parks folks are work together now and continue to work together on a coordinated effort around parks funding that serves the region. And then, again, long term, if we decide to move forward in sort of starting these conversations, agreement on a preferred annexation scenario and adoption of an interlocal agreement to facilitate smooth and non-disruptive transition of services.
And just, every organization has its institutional memory. And when you talk about Cascade Park, part of the reason we're bringing up and focusing on things like records transition is the institutional memory, at least for the city, is that some of the external services, that piece had been thought out and actually went fairly well, but we had not focused as much on the inside of the organization about how do you transition services around human resources, around legal, around records retention, and public disclosure requirements around the finance office. So we want to make sure that we've learned from that experience, and that would be a key part of any of the discussions going forward. But at this point, if you'll kind of advance to the last or second to last slide, what we really we're just hoping to hear today was whether or not you have an interest in going ahead and continuing with these discussions. If you are, then we'll start working with Kathleen's office to schedule some exploratory meetings and then start talking about what would it take to actually make annexation work financially. We're at this spot, and just, kind of to call it out, when I look at the way that the local government revenue system is set up, whether it's the city or the county, the GMA and local government revenues are irreconcilable at this point. And if the state is really committed to the GMA, then they need to adopt a revenue system and tools that actually facilitate the GMA. One of our city councilors basically put it that when we were looking at these, that the UGA was either going to bankrupt the county or bankrupt the city, but the city, it would be slower. And so that's kind of the fiscal situation that we're in, knowing that going in. But I think we do have some ways that we can minimize those impacts and really look at those collaboration opportunities coming up. The last thing I really wanted to bring up is I think it's an opportune time for the discussions, because public safety obviously has been top of mind for both of our organizations. And as we contemplate what that looks like going forward, potential annexation actions have a significant impact on both of us from the provision of public safety. We're looking at going out to the voters at some point for additional resources to put towards our police department. Council will be making the decision on August 4th, whether that is going to be in November of this year or will get deferred until next year. Much smaller ask than what we were looking at with Proposition 4, in essence, really geared towards how many people can we accommodate in our existing facilities without having to build another building. That's also intentional in that if we annex, as you start to look around the area, the geographic center of Vancouver could potentially shift dramatically, and that would impact where we would potentially want to have facilities if we have entire new populations that we need to serve. But I know that your model, at least currently right now, I think you're around 0.5 FTE in officers for 1,000 population. We're around 1.2 and seeking to get that number up. So that's just an example of the service level difference between what I'd consider more of an external or rural services provider and an urban services provider. So questions, discussion.
Okay, again, this is a lot to chew on here. Really appreciate you bringing this forward. I'll turn to my council first. I have a few questions, but councilors, Councilor Belcott.
Good morning. I guess my major concern is what was already mentioned, the fiscal impacts, as both the county and the city are in fiscal deficits. How could this even be a possibility at this point, since we are fiscally impacted without the state assisting? Like what would that even look like?
Yeah, and thank you, Councilor Belcott. I think that's would be the purpose of having a joint legislative ask, to be able to go to the legislature with both organizations advocating for the same thing. I think there's power in having cities and counties working together, advocating up in Olympia for positions. And as we have these discussions, I think we'd be able to identify those areas that, if we make this tweak here, or if we make this change here, this can actually work.
Yes, and I know for me personally, I have many constituents, particularly Minnehaha and Hazeldale, that want to remain with the county and have been very vocal with me ever since the city did have your annexation presentation. They want to remain with the county. So definitely, I think that would have to involve a lot of public outreach in my district in particular. Because it is really the closest to the city, because it's Hazeldale, Minnehaha, Salmon Creek, Philida, and out to Orchards. So I think my district in particular would be the most impacted. I know District 1 is already in the city, but there would be significant changes in my district in particular.
Yeah, and one thing that I didn't note, because people have a lot of questions about what's the financial impact to me? What do taxes look like? What does it mean to my bottom line? And that actually almost has to be an individual property by property discussion. Because, for example, if you are on the City of Vancouver's utilities, there is a surcharge for people outside of the city limits. And so depending on what you are paying on your monthly utility bills, and the value of your property, it can actually cost less for you to be in the city than it does out in the county. But those are the kind of things when we actually start doing public outreach, we can put some calculators together and help people really understand what that difference actually looks like.
Yeah, that was another mention from constituents. The tax differentiation between the city and the county was another significant concern, especially those that were retired and on a pretty strict budget. The concerns were that they would have to sell their house and move farther north to stay into the county because of the tax differentiation.
And I can say it really is sort of a property by property analysis. So during the Van Mol North process, we developed a calculator that it's on the website. It had, I think, like 20 different inputs because it really depends on who your service provider is and various your property value, but various other inputs as well. And when we did engagement, we literally had iPads and people with them, and we're walking people through these things so that they could get a pretty specific understanding of what the true financial impact would be, taking into account all those inputs. And I think, so that's a ways off, but we would anticipate doing something there like that here, because it's really important that people understand how it can impact them in a variety of ways, but on the financial side, obviously, and their bottom line is hugely important.
And the last thing I would say is that, the GMA that actually allowed for all of that development to occur out in those areas does not anticipate that those areas will not be part of a city someday. I mean, it's intended that they'll be part of a city in 20 years. And for many of those areas, we're already well beyond that 20-year period. At some point, they might be able to continue to go along, but at some point with the state's commitment to the GMA, it starts to feel like they'll force the issue that, being able to stay out there and just be part of the county in perpetuity at some point will not be an option on the table.
I agree, and my feeling is the same. Thank you so much.
Other questions? Go ahead, Councilor Young.
Yes, some more comments than anything, but thank you for being here, and thank you. I did watch, I think, part, if not the whole conversation that happened at the city council, and I cannot express enough how appreciative I am that we're looking at this for not trying to, gain, not trying to pull specific areas that financially balance out and put the county in jeopardy, or the city, either way. So I appreciate that willingness to collaborate on this process. And I will say that when that discussion did take place, that I received quite a few emails from people with concerns, which were brought up before. And unfortunately, my response to them was, I don't think this will be happening anytime in the near future. And so I had to send emails back to some folks and say, hey, you might tune in today. This is happening a little quicker, possibly, than I thought. So there is a lot of concern, and I think that is excellent. I look forward to looking at that in terms of like the iPad and people being able to see what the financial impact to them might be. But I think it's also equally important to communicate the benefit that they'll receive, because there is a significant benefit that they'll see. It may not happen on day one of annexation. It might take time, but there are lots of benefits to this taking place. I appreciated the comment where you said that the county is trying to provide urban services, because that is really what it is. We're trying. We're not set up to do that. We're not funded to do that. And I mean, the entire structure is not designed to be operating such big urban areas. So this is really well overdue. And I appreciate this conversation moving forward. I think it's important. annexation just kind of has that bad connotation to it, and it's going to be a challenge to get through that. You know, the city does a really good job of communicating with its people, so I think that that is a challenge that you are able to overcome. One of the things that I was considering about, so, and this is something that I have actually, I think I may have actually spoken with you, Lon, in the past about transferring development services over to the city prior to, and specifically like the building industry, you know, building permitting, inspections, all of that stuff. And it would require adoption of the Vancouver City Code, which I think would simplify things. You know, I'm a licensed contractor. Almost every permit I've ever pulled is in the city of Vancouver, but there has been one that I pulled in the county and I had to learn the entire system. So there's going to be some efficiencies gained with that. And I look forward to doing that. I will say, though, that we have done some really important work on that. You heard the tail end of our discussion on the housing options. So I hope that when we start to look at that, maybe we can look at the code in general and see if there's some things from the county that we can glean and adopt into the system and make it kind of the best of both worlds. And I am curious, though, when we do talk about that transfer, especially when you talk about like street standards and such, that is going to be an expense that I'm not quite sure how the county will bear at this point. So that's going to be kind of a point that we're going to have to work through, obviously. But I am supportive of that move, and I appreciate the attempt that we're making here to do this in pieces so that all the impacts are not felt at one time. It makes sense to do that. And I think that's pretty much it. I would say that community engagement is incredibly important on this, but I am supportive of this. We will end up backing up real quick. Highway 99, you know, we have a very slim community development or community planning, and they do excellent work with the amount of staff that they have. But just like thinking about looking at Highway 99 and the overlay that exists there, that's another reason why this makes sense. The city does have the staff on hand to look at large urban areas. And I mean, you've done the Heights, you've done the waterfront. Multiple times you've been through this process where you take an area that's just not quite developing out like you want to, and then there's very intentional process of how we're going to see growth develop in that area in the coming decades. So just wanted to say that I'm very supportive of moving forward with this.
And actually, one thing I would point out is, and this goes back to some of the questions that Councillor Belcott had as well, is that there are tools out there right now that the state has that are intended to help with annexation. And one of them is that for a period of time after annexation, the entity that inherits the property can actually capture a percentage of the state sales tax for a period of years. And that money can be used to pay for infrastructure upgrades to those areas. So when I talk about, you know, the opportunities for a joint legislative ask, those are the kind of things that we can look at that, you know, don't necessarily require standing up a new local resource, but would require more investment from the state in order to be able to facilitate those things.
And just one follow-up comment, if I can, Chair. I just wanted to touch on the community engagement piece, and I think we can't overstate the need for collaboration on that. Part of, I think, the balanced approach, right, is city can talk about the benefits of the city and what we do and how we provide services, but we will rely on our county partners to talk to their constituents about why this is necessary long-term to continue providing services at the level they desire. So it will absolutely have to be a joint communication endeavor. And having worked with many of your staff for a long time, they're also great at communicating and engagement. So we would be looking forward to partnering.
I would just add to that too. We're looking at you because you guys are here, but this is very much a joint process. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Little, are you online?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, just because the public safety ballot measure was brought up, I just wanted to mention that I believe at least I had kind of a verbal agreement or understanding with the mayor that whatever action is taken, that we do it together. Our two entities do it together, possibly at the same time, because as you know, whatever actions we take impacts the other jurisdiction, and you know, at least on our end for jail, for courts. And so I guess if they do decide on August 4th to move forward with a ballot initiative, that the ask would be to work with us, with Kathleen, to make sure that the implementation date is delayed so that if we take action, the implementation date would happen at the same time without the extra impacts on our services. If you catch what I'm meaning.
Yeah, and what we've actually done with the sizing of what our ask would be is try to do it in such a way that we would really minimize any potential downstream impacts to the county. In essence, what we're looking at is the officers that we would be hiring would more or less be allowing us to stop paying overtime for the same services that are being provided. It's not something where you'd see a dramatic difference in the caseload coming into the county, but it would allow us to have more officers on shift and really spread that workload around more appropriately on a larger number of people. So we're not at risk of burning our folks out at the rate that we have been, because they've been asked to do a lot. And this one would be substantially smaller than the ask the last time around. But part of that conversation has been because we've been engaged with the county and the other folks that deliver law and justice services around the area. And, you know, where we were standing is we certainly know that the county has needs as well. And when we wanted to be in a position where we could mutually support each other if we end up going to the voters with different asks.
And I would
Okay,
just
great.
mention, I would just mention that this council hasn't decided exactly when we would go forward or what our strategy is, and that will be informed by some work with a consultant. So I think we're both looking out for how we can both be successful going forward with public safety. And I just mentioned also, there's been a great deal of collaboration with all of our partners in law and justice that's been very positive. Anything else, Councilor Little?
Oh yeah, I was thankful for that answer. It sounds like those considerations have been taken into account, so I appreciate that.
Is that it then? Okay, I'll take that silence as a yes, it is. Thank you very much for this. This is very complex and kind of daunting just to look at, but from my perspective, very much overdue. And I've been, I guess, kind of baffled at this huge growth boundary that Vancouver has, and over the years wondered, is that even something that you all wanted, or has it been imposed on you? And even more recently, we've brought in more territory into your growth boundary. And I think there's an option that would bring in even more into your growth boundary. So maybe that would be something to look at as we're planning on how to deal with what's there right now. I think, and I can appreciate the complexity just dealing with EMS District 2 and having that separation from the city of Vancouver. And then a few years down the road, maybe it'll come back together. So things come and go. It would be, I think, really important sooner than later to understand what specific areas you may be looking at, and there'll be infinite amount of detail in negotiations with all of those various services as we go forward. But I think that will inform the comp plans that we're both working on. And I don't know if you've had discussions, if you're just looking maybe primarily at where you're already providing some services as some of the first places you might go. But I think having some kind of broad timeline with broad areas could help us with our planning as we go forward. And I would embrace whatever legislative strategy to find revenue for this going forward. So if you have specifics on that, yeah, let's work together on that. So I'm all for this collaboration to take this to whatever next steps, and understanding that it is a multi-year process going forward, and we'll have more opportunities to talk to each other.
Mhm. Right.
So I guess unless there are other comments, go ahead.
I just want to make sure we had another counselor that was supportive of moving forward with the collaboration. So either Counselor Belcott or Counselor Little.
Counselor Belcott or Counselor Little, are you supportive of moving forward with this annexation collaboration with the City of Vancouver?
I'm supportive of communicating, but not with annexation at this time due to the fiscal constraints I already mentioned.
Counselor
I'm
Little?
supportive of I'm supportive of collaborating and looking into it for a future decision.
Collaborative, looking at it for a future decision.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you, Lon and Rebecca, very much. You're courageous in moving forward with this, and let's move forward together. Thank you.
I guess the last thing I would just say is I know that this conversation is going to engender a lot of public comments. We expect it to, but we actually want to hear those, because for as much as we're trying to anticipate all the questions people would have or that they might ask, there are going to be ones that we miss. So the more that we hear, the more we have a chance to say, okay, we missed that one. So let's figure out how we would address that.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, please sit down. You're out of order. Okay, you're disrupting the meeting. Thank you. I have not adjourned it. Okay, any further comments?
Chair, just one last thing.
Yes.
I think just right off the bat, I mean, just having this discussion and the discussion in April or March, I think it was, with the city, I think that we should work on a communication plan right away, just to kind of address some of the questions that are going to be a result of just this meeting. Even though it's very little answers that we have, just something for people. Yeah, thank you.
Great idea. Thank you. Any other comments from counselors at this time? Okay, without objection, we'll adjourn this work session. Thank you very much.